Coming up on this episode, analysing a couple more Warrior additions, looking at the state of the Golden State roster right now and what's next, including the continued waiting game on Lauri Markkanen. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. First of all, I know I'm going to have to change that intro at some point now with Clay heading to the Mavericks, but I'm just awaiting to see what happens with the remainder of the offseason. And it is a waiting game right now. Like, it's just gone 3 p.m. my time here in Australia, which I think is 10 p.m. West Coast time in the States. Got up this morning at 6 a.m., expected to see some news at least on Buddy Hield. That hasn't been forthcoming at this point. Been waiting every hour since. Still nothing after a pretty busy day of news for the Warriors yesterday. But again, yesterday I thought, I'll just wait another 24 hours, wait and see what happens before I do another podcast episode. Let's get into the moves. Let's start with the one confirmed one from yesterday. I think it was only 36 hours ago, but it literally feels like an eternity given what's happened since. And that's Kyle Anderson, sign and trade to the Warriors, who give a second-round pick to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Slow-mo joins on a 3-year, $27 million contract. Last year is a team option. Good deal. Very, very solid rotation player. A backup power forward for Draymond Green, essentially. You can see why the Warriors would have long held interest in Kyle Anderson. He is a Golden State type of player, right? High IQ, smart player, point forward of sorts, can handle the ball, can pass. The only issue is he can't shoot, and I'm going to get into that more so in a minute. But this is a move alongside DeAnthony Melton. If you just say, all right, Slow-mo and Melton in for Clay and CP3, the Warriors should have a better defense next season. At least as a starting point, they should have a better defense last season where they ranked 15th, middle of the pack. I think these are moves to try and get them back into being a top 10 defense. And that's going to go a long way to obviously pushing them back to the playoffs. Now, they're going to still have to address what's happening offensively, but Slow-mo is certainly going to help them defensively. Switchable defender, long, again, cannot shoot the ball, but kind of is a crafty finisher at times around the rim, can screen on or off the ball. As I said, excellent passer, can be a point forward. Really just another version of Draymond, which could cause some issues if he's out there playing alongside Draymond, which I think we'll see at times. Like, I think we'll see a Slow-mo Draymond 4-5 combination at times, potentially. But there might be some overlapping there where you kind of want to split their minutes for the majority of the time and maybe have them play together 5-6 minutes max. That could be in closing lineups, and to get a guy on less than $10 million who you could foreseeably see as being a closer for you on certain nights is certainly a good move. There's little doubt about that. If you look back at kind of the previous iterations of what the Warriors have done with this kind of position, where it was Dario Saric and then it was JaMychal Green, you'd imagine Kyle Anderson, very different kind of player, not the perimeter threat that those guys necessarily were, but a very smart player and a guy that should have much more impact than those two guys did. And the other move that we've all been waiting for, aside from the Markkanen stuff, which I'll get into, is Buddy Hield, who now, over 24 hours ago, Shams reported that the Warriors were working on finalising a sign and trade deal for Buddy Hield, who, of course, finished the season with the Philadelphia 76ers. My initial thoughts on this, and again, been waiting for it to complete, I would have thought that something would have come out in the last 24 hours. Hasn't been the case. Is that a sign potentially of more things going on here? A multi-team trade, a bigger overall deal that Buddy Hield will be getting worked into rather than just being its own separate two-team trade between the Warriors and 76ers. By the sounds of it, it looks like the Warriors will try and absorb that into the remaining TPE of the Warriors got access to after Clay departed for the Mavericks. That is a good deal. And I've seen some people on social media thinking, kind of clowning the pickup of Buddy Hield. I don't think there's actually any negatives to it whatsoever. I don't think there's any negatives to it. If Buddy Hield's defense is that bad, if his ball handling is that bad, if he's giving you nothing and his shooting kind of isn't as good as we expect, then what's the downside? You're paying a guy, $7 million? I don't know what the downside is. The Warriors have got enough depth to not have to rely on Buddy Hield. Now, I do suppose at the moment, given the current state of the roster, should Buddy Hield come in and like there's no second star like Markkanen or anyone else, then maybe, okay, yeah, there actually is some reliance on Buddy Hield to be a real go-to scorer off the bench. Like, I get that. But otherwise, if the Warriors can also land Markkanen, I think Buddy Hield's like a free hit. A free hit at having someone who you know is a career 40% three-point shooter, is one of the best three-point shooters. I'm not just saying of like this era, but like in NBA history, right? He has made the most threes in the league over the last 5 years, more than Steph. It's Buddy Hield first, Steph second. Now, I don't think he's going to be a starter for this team. And again, I don't think the Warriors are going to be relying on that. It's a go-to guy off the bench who can get you buckets. The upside is here that the Warriors are going to get someone for $7 million who has averaged over 20 points before in a season, who has, for the large part of their career, averaged over 15, 16 points per game. Even on a bad year last year, shot high 30s from three and averaged over 12 points per game, who in his last game, like everyone talks about how bad Buddy Hield's year, or not year, but half a season with the Philadelphia 76ers was. And it was. He was largely out of the rotation in the playoffs. His last game, game 6 of the first round of the playoffs, he had 20 points on 6 of 10 three-point shooting. Now, that's one game, sure, but it just shows you a sample. Like, this is what the guy can do, right? And so that's the upside. You got a guy who could go off for 20 points any given night, who could go 6 of 10 from three-point range. And for a team that lacked shooting and got even worse in that element after losing Clay, like, this is, I think it's fantastic. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And again, you're going to pay a guy, I'm assuming they're going to absorb it into the remaining TPE. So Clay's TPE was $16 million essentially. Kyle Anderson gets 9 or 10 of it. Let's say 9 of it. And then Buddy Hield, what that means, he's going to have to get less than 7 essentially, or 7 or less, let's say. Like, you're talking about a guy who's just come off a 4-year, $94 million contract. He was making over $20 million a year. You are getting him for a third of that price. That's a huge discount on a guy who, in his last game for the 76ers, as bad as his stint with the Sixers went, had 20 points on 6 of 10 shooting. Okay, the guy can't defend, right? The guy can't defend. The guy can't really handle the ball, can't really play make for you, right? Maybe he might not have quite the high IQ to play in the Warriors system. If things go wrong, I just think there's no downside to this. The downside is like, okay, you spent $6 or $7 million for 1 year on a guy who's like your 10th or 11th man. So be it. Like, I just don't think there's any downside. There's no risk to this. And again, the upside is you get a guy who can score you 20 points on any given night and who can absolutely drill threes at a high rate on a team that didn't necessarily have that beyond Steph after losing Clay. I think it's a very good move. And he's not necessarily, as I said, he's not going to be a starter. I think it's either going to be Melton or Pods as presently constructed in that 2-guard spot. And yeah, Buddy Hield, okay, they might rely on him a bit for some scoring off the bench, but I think the Warriors are still deep enough, especially if they can make a trade for a genuine second offensive star. Like, I think the upside's there, and I think there's very little downside for the Warriors in this move. I wanted to kind of talk about those two acquisitions as part of the entire state of the Golden State roster right now, because to me, it's almost as if the Warriors are re-engineering like this in reverse. Like, they're doing this in reverse, where a lot of times you'll go out, you'll target the star player as hard as you can, you try and land that player, and then you figure everything else out around it, right? And you just make do with what you've got left over. I think the Warriors in this situation are literally getting all the other pieces, like the side pieces, the bench pieces in place to then say to themselves, okay, we can afford to lose this player, this player, this player, this player, and sacrifice them, sacrifice the picks to make it work to get a guy like Lauri Markkanen, right? That is what they're doing. They are, like, once they trade for Lauri Markkanen, their roster will essentially be set. Their roster is technically set right now, assuming the Buddy Hield trade goes through and it's part of the, absorbing into Clay's TPE and there's no outgoing salary in the deal to the Sixers or whatever, then the Warriors will have 15 players on their roster. Again, that's under the assumption that the Hield trade goes through, that they sign Quentin Post to a guaranteed main roster deal next season, which I think will happen just because of how cheap those late second round picks are on contracts. We know what TJD's on 4 years, 7.6 million or whatever. Bronny James just signed 4 years for about the same amount. We know how cheap those guys are money wise. So I think Post will probably go on the main roster. And of course, they can waive Guy Santos anytime, whose kind of deal is non-guaranteed. That if they keep him, that's 15. They could get rid of him and open a roster spot. Plus, they've just got Reece Beekman on a two-way contract. I think Pat Spencer's still on a two-way contract, so they've only got one two-way spot left. So really, this is the Warrior roster right now, and then we're just waiting kind of for the 3-for-1, 4-for-1 trade, or maybe it's 2-for-1 and picks, and there's another deal. There's some things that the Warriors can do here, and Markkanen's obviously the first of them, and I just think this is perfectly set up for Markkanen to come in. I don't think the Warriors would have necessarily made these moves without thinking ahead to what's coming next. And that, I think, is the hope and the optimism for the Warriors fans right now. Because I look at the front court, right? Slow-Mo, I like Slow-Mo as a player. Good player, productive player, winning player, most importantly as well, can really impact winning. But if you look at him as part of the Warrior front court, if you've got him, Draymond, JK, PJD, and Loon as your 4-5s, that's 5 guys who are your 4-5 combinations, there is no shooting there whatsoever. Not one NBA defense is guarding any of those guys from beyond the arc. They're not. They're playing JK for the drive. They're saying, okay, Draymond, if you want to go ahead and shoot 40% from 3 again next season, be our guest. Go for it. A Draymond Green 3 is good for us. TJD obviously might try and extend out, doesn't have it right now. Loon, obviously, an occasional mid-range jumper here and there. Kyle Anderson shot 22.9% from 3 last season on 0.6 attempts per game, which I think was his lowest since his rookie year. So not only is he not making any threes, but he's actually not taking them at all. Percentage is horrific and attempts are horrific. So there's no 3-point shooting in the front court at the 4-5 whatsoever at the moment, which to me doesn't make sense. And to me doesn't make sense to the point where there has to be another move coming. Because you can't just enter, you can't enter a season with those 5 guys as part of your 4-5. You can't. There has to be another move coming. And you can say, oh, well, they just drafted a 7-foot sniper, Quentin Post, with the 52nd overall pick. We're not relying on that guy. We're not throwing him into the equation with these other 5 guys and saying, well, hang on, he's actually our 3-point shooter at the center position. He's going to play regular rotation minutes for us. Again, we are not, I think it's unfair to go into next season expecting that Quentin Post is going to have the same impact that Trayce Jackson-Davis did. It's just, that's not realistic. It would be lovely, it'd be fantastic if it could happen, but it's that's not the fair expectation on him. It's really not. So you're going to look at this and think, okay, those 5 guys at the 4-5, something's got to give here. Something's got to give where, okay, one, they all can't play, and at the same time, you've got 5 guys there. Sometimes Draymond's going to play small ball 5, and that leaves 3 of them on the bench, kind of thing. Who knows what's going to happen here? But what I do know is you cannot enter next season with those 5 guys as your 4-5 combination. It doesn't make any sense to the point where Warriors surely think or know that something else is coming here at some point. And I like the addition of Buddy Hield. He gives you the 3-point shooting. I get it, but you still need a guy at the 4-5 who can shoot, and they don't have that right now. And so we're playing a waiting game on seeing what happens next here. And Markkanen obviously is the big one. And I think you look at the state of the Golden State roster right now, and there's 4 guys who kind of stand out to me as, okay, you can now be sacrificed. Essentially, you are guys who we can cover without really feeling the pain of your departure. And I think that's one, Wiggins, if they get Markkanen, right? And the reason I say that is because Melton coming in, he can provide a little bit of the perimeter defense that Wiggins does, so he can cover a bit there. And I also think going forward with Wiggins, now I'm not saying Wiggins is going to be part of the Markkanen trade. In fact, I don't think he will be at all. I think he's a separate piece for afterwards if that happens, because I think if you're going forward, the Warriors are clearly looking at a financial reset here, getting under the first apron, if not like the luxury tax altogether. You're looking at this and thinking, okay, if we keep Kuminga out of the deal and we get Markkanen, they're two guys that we're going to have to give big extensions to. So you got Steph on over $50 million. You're going to have Markkanen on a max. JK might play his way into a max. If not, he's going to be upwards of $120 million, you would have thought. You're going to have Draymond still on $25 million. They're just not going to be able to afford to have Wiggins. It's as simple as that. So I could see them trading Wiggins for maybe another guy who makes similar money. And it's kind of like the whole Chris Paul situation here where the Warriors said, we can't pay Jordan Poole this money over 4 years. Let's get Chris Paul in, pay him for a year and then waive him, right? Which I was critical of a couple of episodes ago, but I can actually see them doing the same thing with Wiggins here. Or like you just keep Wiggins. You could keep Wiggins for the year, but then you really got to trade him next offseason. I think the Warriors might try and get out in front of that now to then be able to say, okay, we've got this guy making, I don't know who it is, but he's on an expiring contract making $25 million. We're going to let that expire, and that gives us the ability to go and hand out extensions to Markkanen and JK. So I think Wiggins is the one here, not necessarily in a Markkanen trade, but afterwards, where I'd expect him to potentially get moved still. Now, I mean, they've got to get Markkanen in the first place, right? And it's going to take a big deal here to be able to acquire him. We know Danny Ainge and what the expectations he's going to have in giving up his best player. I have been kind of tossing and turning here over the last few days on whether I'd give up Kuminga, whether I think Kuminga is going to be is going to be actually in the deal at all. I've kind of I've gone back and forth on it. I actually think I'm leaning more towards he's not going to be in the deal. And that probably stems from, I just finished listening to the Warriors Plus Minus podcast with the Athletic guys. And Tim Kawakami made an interesting point where he said, Kuminga's obviously got value. We understand that. But Kawakami said the value might actually not be as high as what we think, because anyone that's trading for him acknowledges that you're probably going to have to pay him either this offseason in an extension or next offseason as a restricted free agent. If you pay him this offseason as an extension, you're probably looking at over $120 million. You could take the risk, and maybe he has a bad year, and you either let him go or you get a more reasonable extension. But the other side of that is the guy explodes even further next season, and now you're having to pay him a max. Now you're having we saw what Cade Cunningham, Scotty Barnes just got, 5 years over $200 million. If I'm the Warriors, and after all of this, I keep Jonathan Kuminga out of any other trade that goes on, I'm handing him an extension this offseason. I don't want the risk of him taking another leap and then all of a sudden we get to restricted free agency next season and another team goes, you know what, that guy's really good, we're paying him the max, and then forcing the Warriors' hand. I'm getting out in front of it, now, I'm not saying I'm giving him a max this offseason. That's not what I'm doing. I'm saying, okay, we think he's worth 4-year, 120, 30 mil. We think that's actually pretty decent, rather than taking the risk and having to potentially pay him 5 years, 220 or whatever it's going to be. I'd rather get out in front of that now. So Kawakami basically said that the value might not be as much and teams might not necessarily be as interested in JK because of the need to give him an extension, which essentially means it's going to be every single pick in the world, every single pick swap the Warriors have got, throw it all at the Jazz, and really, salary-wise, we know Markkanen's making $18 million. It's going to be easy to get to that. It's probably, you can do it, Loon and GP2. Loon and GP2, and they are the other Loon, GP2, Wiggins I just spoke about, and Moody. They're the four guys that I'm looking at right now and thinking, with what the Warriors have done so far, they can afford to go. They can afford to go. They can cover those guys. Is Looney going to be in the rotation over TJD and Draymond minutes? And if they get Markkanen as part of it, and then you got Slow-Mo in the mix as well, JK, that, again, those 4-5s, where does Loon fit in? I don't think he necessarily does, right? You look at GP2, Warriors have got so many two guards right now. Melton, Pods, they bring in Buddy Hield, that's 3, right? Where does GP2 fit into that? And that's not even mentioning, if Moody was still there, as he is on the roster right now, then he's a guy that can play the 2 and the 3. He might be ahead of GP2. That's not to mention Lindy Ward as the third, which GP2 would be ahead of him, you'd imagine, in the rotation. But again, it's another option that can play the two or the three. So I don't know where GP2 fits. Like, he's the one that looks like he's going to be squeezed out here. And again, GP2, $9.1 million, Loon, $8 million. They combine to make $17 million. You add the 20%, I think it is, which the Warriors can now do because they're under the luxury tax. They can do that to get up to they can add those two guys to all the picks, get Markkanen. And that's what it would be. Now, maybe Moody's probably in there as well. Maybe they push for pods. I think ideally from a Warrior standpoint, it would just come down to, all right, here's the expiring salaries of GP2 and Loon. Here's every single pick we can possibly do, every pick swap we can possibly do. That's it. That's the deal right there. And I think I'd definitely do that trade. Now, again, would the Jazz go for that? Are they going to need Moody? I don't think Moody would be a sticking point. I think the Warriors would be like, yep, no worries. Here's Moses. Pods. I think if it came down to it, the Warriors would say, yep, here's Pods as well. JK, different story, but by the sounds of it, I think they're going to try and keep JK, because what the Warriors will be saying to the Jazz is that if we give up all our picks, we've got to have some semblance of chance of being decent in 5, 6, 7 years. We're not going to give you all these picks and just turn around and say, yeah, we're bound to be crap in 6, 7 years. Those picks are probably going to be in the top 5. It is what it is. And so that's why I think the Warriors would say, no, can we at least keep Kuminga? That means we've got Markkanen and Kuminga. And then that gives us a base to say, you know what? 5 years' time, Markkanen's 32, 33, Kuminga's 26, 27. Those two guys probably still in the prime of their careers. We can still be a competitive team to allow us a chance to have those picks, outside the lottery rather than, guaranteed top 5, top 10 picks. Right. And then if it's just Loon and GP2, you know what? You've still got Pods, you've still got Moody, you've still got TJD. They would have no picks whatsoever, or at least no access to their own picks. There'd be pick swaps in there and stuff like that because of the CBA rules and whatever else. They would have no access to any of their picks coming up. But at least you'd be able to say, you know what? Markkanen, JK, Pods, Moody, TJD, pretty good core 5 players to build with as a young core, on top of what Steph and Draymond are going to be able to do for you in the next couple of years. Obviously, those guys are going to fade out. And then when they fade out or they're retired completely and those picks come along, you've got those guys in place, specifically Kuminga and Markkanen, to say, you know what, we still have a chance of being a competitive playoff team, and those picks might fall out of the lottery. And then the Jazz are also going to look at it and say, well, maybe, Markkanen walks in a year. Maybe you don't come to terms on an extension. He walks in a year or something else happens. Maybe Kuminga doesn't come on like you expect, and maybe those picks post Steph Curry are very tantalizing. And if there's no protections on them whatsoever, this could be the version for them of, the Nets Celtics trade with KG and Paul Pierce, and the Celtics ending up getting all the picks that, result in Tatum and Brown and whatnot. That could be their version, right? And those picks could be really tantalizing. But I don't think that should stop the Warriors. I think the Warriors should go in with all the picks. If it means they can keep Kuminga, if it means they can keep Pods, I think those two, again, Moody, I'd be more willing to give up. I like Moses. I think he's a valuable player. Clearly, Steve hasn't recognized that as such on a consistent basis over his first 3 years in his career. But I'm just looking at the state of the roster right now where it's pretty much full. You include Buddy Hield, that's 15 players. There's got to be another move here. It's got to be another move. And I think it might be some combination of Looney, GP2, and Moody, 2 or 3 of those guys, and all the picks for Markkanen, and then Wiggins is the other piece. Now, the issue with Wiggins is if he's not included in the Markkanen trade, then you're going to have a hard time getting off that contract and getting back and expiring. Let's say Bruce Brown. Bruce Brown would be the perfect one, in my opinion. Bruce Brown would be the perfect one. If they make the Markkanen trade and they say, you know what, we're paying Markkanen and Kuminga big extensions this offseason or whatever, Bruce Brown would be the perfect one to go to the Raptors and say, we'll give you Wiggins for Bruce Brown, right? The issue is the Warriors would have to add something on top of that. to make it for the Raptors to be appeased. And we got no picks left because we just gave them all to the Jazz. How do you do that? Right now, maybe Toronto, maybe they think, yeah, we're bringing a Canadian home. Maybe they might be more open to it than other teams might be. Maybe that's where you keep Moody. You keep Moody out of the Jazz trade, and then all of a sudden, if you go to the Raptors and say, okay, here's Wiggins, Moody, and a second-round pick for Bruce Brown's expiring. They're wanting to get all the Canadian blokes together. They got RJ Barrett, Kelly Olynyk. They traded for those two guys mid-year. Maybe they do that deal. And then, that's a good team the Warriors to be left over with. Now you're talking about Steph, if Melton or Pods at the 2, JK, Draymond, Lauri Markkanen, Pods, Buddy Hield, Bruce Brown, Slow-Mo, PJD. That's a really good team. That's a guaranteed playoff team, in my opinion. And it's probably a guarantee. You got to be healthy, right? You got to be available, and you can't have an injury to Steph, and Draymond can't do silly shit and whatever else. But you'd think that's a good enough team to be in the top 6, right? And now we're talking. I think you're at least top 6. You might sniff into the top 4. We'll wait and see. But I think that's what I'm thinking if you're the Warriors. That's something you land Markkanen, do what it takes to get him. Say to yourself, yeah, we're going to give Markkanen and Kuminga are not only our present, but they are our future to ensure those picks aren't great. Sorry, aren't great as in for the Jazz. They don't land in as top 10 picks. We're going to give them big extensions, pay those guys, and as a result, Wiggs has got to go. We can't afford to pay Andrew Wiggins the remaining. Might be able to afford to pay him next season, but we can't afford him to play. We can't afford to pay him that much to play for the last 2 seasons. And as a result, you kind of got to get rid of him now, because then you're backed into a corner and you've got to trade him somewhere next offseason. And then you're really going to have to give up assets because teams can see you're backed into a corner because you've just given those deals out to Kuminga and Markkanen. So I think they've got to get on the front foot, deal Wiggs, try and get an expiring contract. Bruce Brown would be perfect in that situation, I'd imagine. So just something to that's just me speculating, hypothesizing what the Warriors could do here. But they could do that and have a really good team next season, really good team, still kind of know what they're doing financially. As I said, commit to JK and Markkanen and go from there, and make sure that they're not only good next season, but they've got a core in place to ensure that they can still be competitive after Steph, and when a couple of those picks still land for the Jazz, making sure they're not in the top 10. But it's a super interesting spot to be in right now. Very pessimistic on the start of the Warriors offseason in terms of losing CP3 and just waiving him, and then obviously losing Clay, which, there's a lot of stuff coming out about Clay at the moment. I don't really want to talk about it. Ramona Shelburne had a really, really good article, no doubt about that, really good article on ESPN earlier today. Loved it, but I don't think I need to be here, speculating on, who was to blame for the entire departure of Klay Thompson from the Golden State Warriors. I don't think that does anyone any good. And frankly, I've been listening to a heap of podcasts. When people start talking about it, I'm not really interested in hearing about it. I think at the end of the day, the Warriors probably need to come out and just try and tell their truth, and Klay needs to do the same, and try and get to the absolute bottom of it. But in terms of media reports and media speculation and stuff like that, I just, it is what it is at the end of the day. Klay Thompson's no longer a Golden State Warrior. I'm very sad and disappointed, absolutely. But it just is what it is, and we move on. And, I think as much as I love Klay, favorite ever player, I'm a Warrior fan first and foremost, and I know I've got a lot of mates who are, player fans first and foremost, and they'll follow players to other teams. I'm not doing that. I'm not following Klay. I'll support Klay, and I hope he does really well at the Mavericks, but I'm not all of a sudden a Mavericks fan. I'm a Warriors fan still, right? So I'm looking forward to seeing, after a pessimistic start to the offseason, what they could potentially do here. I like the moves of Slow-Mo, Melton, Buddy Hield. I really like them, but it's not going to mean much if they can't land Markkanen, and that's the one right now where we are honing in waiting for something, waiting for news to happen. And I'm cautious. Like, I'm trying to be optimistic, but I'm also being cautious about it because we've got to look at the Warriors' recent history here. They had a crack at LeBron James at the mid-season deadline, was emphatically denied by him and his management. Shelburne reported today that they also had a crack at Mikal Bridges. Didn't obviously work out. Once the Warriors season finished, there was speculation on a reunion with KD. There was talk of Jimmy Butler with the reports of unrest at the Miami Heat. Neither of those two were kind of never overly serious, you wouldn't have thought. But the Paul George thing certainly was. And there was plenty of us as Warrior fans that thought Paul George is going to be a Warrior by this time, as I'm sitting here right now, that he would have been a Warrior. Clippers didn't want to play ball, which is absolutely their prerogative. And PG opts out and becomes an unrestricted free agent and leaves for the 76ers. So after all of this, like the potential of landing a second star for Steph Curry, this whole marketing business, it feels like this is a stronger chance to happen than maybe some of the other stuff that's come before. And you can see why Utah would want to trade Markkanen, because right now, Markkanen's too good where he's kind of ruining their rebuild. Because with Markkanen, they're kind of too good. They're like not a playoff team, but they're like 11th, 12th in the conference. It means they're not picking necessarily in the top 5 or don't have the highest odds anyway to pick in the top 5 or 6, which means they're not getting access to the absolute top tier, top 3 players in the draft. And so therefore, to get that absolute like blue chip player who's better than Markkanen, who is an absolute superstar, then like you've probably got to be picking in the top 3 in the draft. And if you've got Markkanen on your team, like he's too good. He's too impactful to winning. He's too good a player for you to be one of the worst teams in the league. And so I can see like that is why there's going to be an incentive here for Danny Ainge if he gets a great deal to say, yeah, like we love Lauri, but like this is our direction. And we want an absolute blue chip product, and our only way to do that is to get a top 3 pick, hopefully number 1 overall pick, try and have a crack at Cooper Flag next year. And we can't do that if Lauri's on the roster because he's literally like he's too good. We can't do that. And so maybe there's more of a shot here. Yahoo Sports' Jake Fisher reported today that there's a 10% chance that the Jazz move Markkanen. I hope it's more than that. We'll wait and see. The Kings and Spurs have also been speculated as having a strong offer on the table, but there's also interest in DeMar DeRozan from both those teams. So I don't know what that says. Just having a look at my watch notifications. That's nothing important. We're in that state, right? We're in that state where every notification, like obviously got Woj, Shams on notifications. Every one we get, we're just looking down, waiting to see if it's something to do with the Warriors. And hopefully, maybe by the time you're listening to this, there's something happens. Hopefully, something in the next 24 hours. You might need to wait. Like, could happen later in the off season. Could happen, in weeks' time, in a month's time, couple of months' time. Maybe something doesn't happen whatsoever. Maybe it's something that the Jazz park until the start of the season or mid-season, something like that. Who knows? We'll wait and see. But hopefully, Lauri Markkanen's a Warrior player for it's going to be a steep price. We understand it's going to be a steep price. But if the Warriors can keep Kuminga and Pods, then I think every Warrior fan is probably going to see that as a win. Because at the end of the day, and the other thing about this is that once you draft a player, then you and you watch that guy play for a couple of years, as JK's been for 3 years, even Pods has, had an impressive rookie season or rookie first team. I think as fans, you become so much more attached to players rather than picks, obviously. Like, those picks that the Warriors are potentially going to give up to the Jazz, they could become really good players, and we can look at that and say, geez, the Warriors could have had that guy or that guy. But it doesn't hurt as much, I think, giving up all these picks when you don't know who they're actually going to be, rather than JK or Pods or a young player that you've seen blossom, you've seen improve, you've seen become a part of this team, a big part of this team, as those two guys have over the last 12 months, and particularly the last second half of the season, where JK took a massive rise, essentially became one of our best players, and Pods became a starter. Took Clay's job as the starting 2 guard for a bit there mid-season. So we'll wait and see what happens, but hopefully by the time next episode's out, maybe Lauri Markkanen's a Golden State Warrior, and I'm pretty sure by next episode Buddy Hield will probably be a confirmed Warrior as well. I mean, a lot of outlets are already speaking like that kind of thing. So anyway, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, guys, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on Twitter/X. I'm going to get this podcast out ASAP. It's going to be nearly midnight for you guys on the West Coast of America. Happy 4th of July. Maybe you're out celebrating. Maybe you can come home after a few beers and listen to this at 5 o'clock in the morning. Who knows? But I'm going to get it out ASAP because I know if I wait, usually sometimes I get episodes out at like 11 p.m. Australian time, which is like 6 a.m. West Coast in America. If I wait till then, something's bound to happen. Something's bound to happen, and therefore this episode becomes null and void. I'm going to have to do another one. So I'm going to get it out ASAP. Otherwise, guys, if you are in America, enjoy your 4th of July. Be safe, and I'll see you on the next episode.